Before James T. Kirk became the most famous captain in Starfleet history, and before the 5-year mission, and even more before the adventures that defined an entire franchise, there was another captain sitting in the center seat of the USS Enterprise, Christopher Pike. For decades, Pike was one of Star Trek's greatest mysteries. He appeared in the original pilot episode, The Cage, before largely disappearing from the franchise, leaving Trekkies with more questions than answers. Mainly, what happened during the years before Kirk took command? Thanks to Star Trek Strange New Worlds, we finally have those answers. Christopher Pike's Enterprise isn't simply an early version of Kirk's famous starship. It is ultimately a vessel with its own identity, its own crew, and its own unique missions. But it does have a key place, or rather its own place, in Starfleet history. From the bridge and engineering decks, to battles against the Gorn and encounters with the galaxy's strangest phenomena, Pike's Enterprise has rapidly become one of the most beloved starships in modern Star Trek history. Today, with the return of Strange New Worlds and the launch of Season 4, we're taking a deep dive into the USS Enterprise NCC 1701 during the era of Captain Christopher Pike. We'll explore its technology, its history, its missions, but also the incredible behind-the-scenes work that brought this legendary starship back to life for a new generation. And yes, the somewhat awkward subjects around the modern era design, because that's a long discussion. Now, if you're enjoying these Star Trek videos, hit that subscribe button to never miss another one. Okay, engage. Let's break down how you can actually make money playing mobile games using free cash. Scan the QR code or tap the link in the description to claim your $10 sign-up bonus. Free Cash is an online app where users from all over the world can sign up for free and make money online by playing your favorite mobile games. Sounds too good to be true. Here's why it's not. Brands waste fortunes on ignored ads. Instead, companies pay Free Cash to get real players to test their apps. And Free Cash pass a chunk of that cash onto you. Let's be clear, it's not a full-time income or get-rich-quick trick, but it is an easy way to earn extra cash having fun. All you do is launch Free Cash on your device, choose a game, and play. Pretty simple. Just make sure you enable app tracking on your phone or device so you can log your achievements and pay you out as you level up. It's a massive, legitimate platform with over 70 million registered users, more than $300 million paid out, and a 4.6-star rating on Trustpilot. If you're already relaxing in your quarters playing mobile games, you might as well get rewarded for your time. Just pick an offer, like this one, and start playing. But again, make sure you've enabled app tracking when prompted. It'll pop up on your screen. That's essential so Free Cash's sensors can track your progress and credit your rewards automatically. Once you reach the $25 minimum cash out threshold, you can withdraw your earnings via PayPal, crypto, or gift cards. So what are you waiting for? Sign up with my link at the top of the description or pinned comment, and you'll get an instant $10 bonus. This puts you nearly halfway to your first payout. Again, tap the link below, energize your $10 head start, and we'll see you there. Make it so. Even among Starfleet's impressive fleet, the Constitution-class stood apart. First launched in 2245, under the command of Captain Robert April, the USS Enterprise was designed to be one of Starfleet's premier heavy cruisers. At over 440 meters in length, the vessel represented the cutting edge of Federation engineering and exploration capabilities. I will say the actual length of the Enterprise is a bit up in the air. Strange New Worlds does establish it around 440 meters, yet in the original series, it's about 289 meters. We'll cover more of this in the behind the scenes section. The class quickly became synonymous with excellence. Serving aboard a Constitution class wasn't simply just another assignment, it was an honor. These ships were intended to push the boundaries of exploration, diplomacy, and scientific discovery. And at the center of nearly all of them was the Enterprise. Visually, the Constitution-class established a design language that would influence Starfleet vessels for centuries to come. The saucer section, the secondary engineering hull, and the twin warp nacelles. Even hundreds of years later, those same design principles remain visible throughout Federation shipbuilding. In many ways, Pike's Enterprise represents a moment that design philosophy truly matured. When Captain Christopher Pike assumed command in the early 2250s, the Enterprise had already completed one 5-year mission under Robert April. But by the time of Strange New Worlds, the ship had already become one of Starfleet's most experienced exploration vessels. Unlike Kirk's later command, Pike's Enterprise often feels more like a family, almost like a home. The ship is filled with officers who enjoy serving together, and nowhere that is more obvious than in the vessel's own design. The Enterprise during Pike's era wasn't built just for exploration, it's built for living. Now, one of the most important events in the Starship's history occurred during the closing stages of Star Trek Discovery Season 2. The Enterprise had joined a battle against Control near the planet of Zahir, facing hundreds of autonomous Section 31 vessels in one of the largest engagements even seen during the 23rd century. The battle left the ship heavily damaged, particularly around the forward saucer section. Rather than simply restoring the vessel, Starfleet took the opportunity to modernize it. The result was the version of the Enterprise that audiences would come to know throughout Strange New Worlds. And honestly, many do consider it one of the most beautiful versions of the Enterprise ever created. At the heart of the Enterprise sat its matter-antimatter warp core. This system generated the immense energy required to power the vessel's systems and propel it across interstellar distances. Like other Constitution-class vessels, the Enterprise maintained a cruising speed around warp 6, while achieving emergency velocities approaching warp 8. For the mid-23rd century, this represented extraordinary capability. The Enterprise could reach regions of space that previous generations of starships simply couldn't access. Entire sectors became available for exploration. First contact missions increased dramatically. This did mean that Starfleet's influence expanded across the Alpha Quadrant. The Constitution-class wasn't just faster than what came before, it fundamentally changed what Starfleet was capable of accomplishing. Now, while exploration remained its primary mission, the Enterprise was far from defenseless. The ship carried multiple phaser emitters and photon torpedo launchers, providing substantial firepower whenever diplomacy sometimes failed. Defensive systems were made of energy shielding, capable of protecting the vessel against a wide variety of threats. Now, this balance between scientific capability and military readiness would become one of the defining features of the Constitution-class. The Enterprise wasn't a warship, but it would certainly defend itself when necessary. And as Captain Pike would discover repeatedly, the galaxy often made that necessary. If there's one location that defines Pike's Enterprise, it has to be the bridge. The Strange New Worlds bridge is a masterclass in modern Star Trek design. It's bright, comfortable, functional, but still instantly recognizable as the Star Trek bridge. The bridge underwent substantial modifications following Discovery Season 2, including alterations to its overall layout, view screen design, and internal architecture. Unlike many modern science fiction bridges, Pike's command center kinda feels more practical. Every station appears purposeful, crew members can easily communicate, and perhaps most importantly, it still feels like a place where people actually work. If the bridge is the heart of the Enterprise, then main engineering is its soul. Few locations aboard Pike's Enterprise have received as much praise from fans as the engineering complex seen throughout Strange New Worlds. Unlike the compact engineering room seen in the original series, this version feels immense, industrial, and powerful. It's the kind of place you'd expect to find at the centre of Starfleet's flagship. Now, at the core of the room sits the vessel's matter-antimatter reactor, as we mentioned earlier. It's housed within a towering vertical warp core. The design represents a significant departure from some early interpretations of the Constitution-class, but it still remains visually connected to the engineering spaces eventually seen during Kirk's era. I will be honest, this giant room does sometimes feel a bit off-putting, particularly as you can tell most of the set is digital. Still, walkways extend high above the main floor, there's engineering monitoring systems from elevator control stations, but ultimately, the warp core itself dominates the space like a giant mechanical cathedral, I guess? It is immediately obvious that this room powers everything aboard the ship, and it is kinda bright. Throughout Strange New Worlds, we do see the chief engineer, whether it be Hemmer, Pelia, or even Scotty, sometimes working within this space, basically keeping the Enterprise operational through crises ranging from Gorn attacks to interstellar anomalies. Medical technology aboard Pike's Enterprise represents some of the most advanced healthcare available to the Federation. Under the supervision of Dr. Joseph Mbenga, the Enterprise's sickbay became one of the most important locations in Strange New Worlds. It also gave us some of the best scenes. Unlike earlier versions of the Constitution-class interior, Pike's sickbay feels massive. It's kind of capable of handling multiple emergencies simultaneously. The facility contains numerous treatment areas, diagnostic stations, and biobeds, many of which can be isolated if required during medical emergencies. One particularly interesting feature is the inclusion of a dedicated medical transporter system, allowing critically injured personnel to be transported directly into treatment areas, without passing through the ship's main transporter facilities. Of course, the room's importance goes far beyond its own technology. Many of the most emotional stories in Star Trek Strange New Worlds actually occur here. For example, Dr. M'Benga's efforts to save his daughter, Nurse Chapel's development as a medical officer, and countless life or death situations that tested the crew's resolve. Sickbay wasn't a simple place where characters recovered, it kind of became one of the emotional cores of the series. Now yes, as we're talking about the interior, we're of course going to talk about Pike's quarters. Because if there's one room aboard the Enterprise that perfectly defines Christopher Pike as a captain, it is his living quarters. Unlike many Starfleet captains, Pike doesn't isolate himself from his crew. I'm looking at you, Picard. He actively invites them into his own personal space. And nowhere is that more evident than during the dinners he regularly hosts aboard the ship. Pike's quarters are among the largest and most luxurious captain's accommodations seen in the entirety of Star Trek. The space includes a substantial living area, private facilities, and most famously, a fully functional kitchen. The kitchen has become one of Pike's defining character traits. Nearly every season, we see him cooking something up. Rather than relying solely on food synthesizers, because we're not at replicators just yet, Pike does enjoy cooking for his officers personally. And while that may seem like a silly small detail, it says a lot about his leadership style. Christopher Pike leads through trust, through relationships, and through genuine care for the people under his command. The dinners we see him doing throughout Strange New Worlds aren't just meals, they are moments when the crew becomes a family. I've got to admit, that family atmosphere is one of the reasons this version of the Enterprise feels really special. Now every Enterprise captain does leave their mark on the Ready Room. This room is located directly behind the bridge, and it serves as Pike's private office and command space. We see multiple people conducting briefings here, there's also meetings with senior officers, and usually people are reflecting on the decisions they have to make. One particular notable feature is the presence of various historical models and artifacts celebrating humanity's journey into space. Much like the opening sequences of Star Trek Enterprise, these displays emphasize exploration as a continuing tradition stretching back centuries. For Pike, exploration isn't simply a mission, it's more of a responsibility. And also these models show it's inherited from generations of explorers who came before him. Now while transporters have become a standard technology by the mid-23rd century, they are still represented as one of the most impressive systems aboard the Enterprise. The ship's primary transporter room maintains the classic layout familiar to generations of Star Trek fans. The updated transporter pads and modern control systems allow personnel and cargo to be moved across vast distances almost instantly. Initially, the facility is overseen by Chief Kyle, one of the Enterprise's most reliable crew members, who did vanish off the face of the Earth, but still. And although transporter technology had become increasingly dependable by Pike's era, it remained one of the most critical systems aboard the ship. After all, exploration is much easier when you didn't have to land the ship every time you visit a strange new world. One of the most distinctive additions introduced in Strange New Worlds is the Enterprise's forward crew lounge. Now, as the name might suggest there, it is located near the front of the saucer section. The lounge features enormous panoramic windows offering spectacular views of space and nearby worlds. In many ways, it serves a similar purpose to the observation lounges seen aboard later Federation vessels, or 10 Forward seen of the Enterprise D. Here crew members come to relax, socialise, and occasionally reflect on the incredible sights they're witnessing throughout the galaxy. Again, this room does reinforce an important idea. Pike's Enterprise isn't just a workplace. It's a home and people live here. The lounge helps communicate that better than almost any other location aboard the ship. Also, we've got the port galley, which I won't go into too much detail on, but this also operates as another bar area on board the ship. Like all Constitution-class vessels, the Enterprise carried an extensive complement of Shuttlecraft. Basically, they were there to support exploration and away missions. These craft allowed personnel to access planetary surfaces, transport cargo, and conduct missions beyond the reach of transporter technology. Throughout Strange New Worlds, shuttle operations play a critical role in many of the storylines, particularly when hostile conditions interfere with normal transporter functions. For a ship dedicated to exploration, these support craft were every bit as important as the Enterprise's own warp engines. because sometimes the final frontier requires getting that little bit closer. Let's talk about the lore of the Enterprise before Captain Pike and then the overall lore. Long before Christopher Pike became captain, the Enterprise was already one of Starfleet's most prestigious assignments. Launched in 2245, the USS Enterprise, NCC 1701, entered service under the command of Captain Robert April, one of Starfleet's most respected officers. April would oversee the ship's first 5-year mission, helping establish the Enterprise's reputation as one of the Federation's premier exploration vessels. Serving alongside April was a young officer named Christopher Pike. Eventually, Pike would serve as the Enterprise's first officer. Few could have predicted that he would eventually become one of the most important captains in Starfleet history. Yet by 2250, after April's promotion, command of the Enterprise was passed to Christopher Pike, and a new chapter in the ship's storyline began. I'm going to be honest, I would love to see a flashback to April in command, but probably we won't get that. Unlike many Starfleet captains, Pike's leadership style wasn't built around authority alone. As we said, it was built around trust. The Enterprise under Pike quickly developed a reputation for excellence, but also for something equally important, its crew. Pike chose to surround himself with some of the finest officers in Starfleet. Spock, Number 1, known as Unachin Riley, Joseph Mbenga, Christine Chapel, Erica Ortiguez, La'an Noonien Singh, and many others. Together, they formed one of the most capable crews ever assembled aboard a Federation starship. And unlike many later Starfleet vessels, the crew generally felt close-knit. The Enterprise wasn't simply a starship, it was a community and a family, one that Pike cared deeply about protecting. Now perhaps one of the most important missions of Pike's early command occurred years before the events of Strange New Worlds. This was a Mission to Talos IV. First depicted in The Cage, Star Trek's original unaired pilot episode, the Enterprise responded to a distress call from a scientific expedition believed lost years earlier. Upon arriving at the planet of Talos IV, Pike discovered something far more complicated, a species known as the Talosians. They possess extraordinary telepathic abilities capable of creating incredibly realistic illusions. Captured by the Talosians, Pike became the centerpiece of an experiment designed to determine whether humans could serve as a breeding stock for their declining civilization. During the mission, Pike met Vina, the sole survivor of the original expedition, or so he believed. In reality, much of what Pike experienced was carefully manipulated by the Talosians themselves. The mission ultimately ended with Pike and his crew escaping Talos IV. However, the encounter left a lasting impact on him. Years later, Talos IV would become central to Pike's ultimate fate, but we'll return to that story later. By 2258, the Enterprise found itself involved in one of the most significant events of the era, the Red Angel Crisis. During the second season of Star Trek Discovery, Pike would temporarily assume command of a Crossfield-class USS Discovery, due to the Enterprise also undergoing repairs after a severe systems failure. And what followed during this adventure was a complex conflict involving time travel, artificial intelligence, and a rogue Section 31 program known as Control. Throughout the crisis, Pike repeatedly demonstrated why he'd become one of Starfleet's most respected captains, calm under pressure and compassionate, but also willing to place himself in danger for others. The crisis ultimately culminated in a massive battle near Zahir, as I mentioned earlier. Enterprise joined Discovery in preventing Control from gaining access to the sphere data that could have threatened all life in the galaxy. The battle was successful, but the cost was severe. Discovery would disappear into the far future, but Control was defeated. The Enterprise did suffer extensive damage with the loss of a dear friend. That damage would lead directly into Strange New Worlds. One of the most defining moments in Captain Pike's life occurred during the Discovery era. While investigating a time crystal on the Klingon world of Boreth, Pike witnessed his own future. Not a possible future, his future. A future in which he would sacrifice himself to save several Starfleet cadets during a training accident. That accident would leave him horribly injured, unable to speak, unable to move, confined to the iconic life support chair. For most people, such knowledge would be unbearable, but Pike accepted it, and that's one of the reasons many fans consider him one of Starfleet's greatest captains. Because despite knowing exactly how the story ends, he chose to continue anyway. By 2259, the Enterprise had returned to active service, and with it began the adventures of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. The season opens with Pike wrestling with the knowledge of his future, while attempting to continue serving as captain. His first major mission takes him to Kylie 279, where a developing civilization has accidentally observed Federation technology. The mission immediately establishes one of the core themes of this new series. The Enterprise, once again, becomes what Star Trek has always been best at, a ship exploring strange new worlds, seeking out new life and new civilizations. Now along the way, Pike and his crew encounter everything from ancient civilizations and dangerous anomalies to moral dilemmas that test their understandings of Federation principles. The season also introduces one of the Enterprise's greatest future threats, the Gorn. Although first introduced during Kirk's era, Strange New Worlds dramatically expands the role of the Gorn. Far from a slow-moving reptilian captain, aka the bloke in a rubber suit seen in the episode Arena, these Gorn are terrifying, even if they do look like the elites from Halo. Throughout seasons 1 and 2, the Enterprise repeatedly clashes with Gorn forces operating near Federation space. Entire colonies are destroyed, and the colonists are kidnapped. Starfleet personnel are killed in action. And the Federation gradually begins to realise just how significant a threat the Gorn actually represent. For Pike and his crew, these encounters become some of the most dangerous missions of their careers, and the conflict would only intensify. If Season 1 reintroduced Pike's Enterprise to audiences, Season 2 cemented its place among Star Trek's most beloved crews. The season delivered an extraordinary variety of stories, time travel adventures, political intrigue, comedy, horror, and even a musical episode, which was interesting. One particularly significant mission involved La'an Noonien Singh traveling to an alternate timeline where she encountered young James T. Kirk.
Ma'am, not to be impolite, but who are you and what the hell are you doing on my ship?
Another memorable adventure saw the crew of the California-class USS Cerritos crossover from the animated series of Star Trek Lower Decks, creating one of the franchise's most celebrated crossover episodes. Yet despite the lighter moments, the Gorn Threat continued growing, and by the season finale, the Enterprise found itself facing one of the greatest challenges yet, a full-scale confrontation with the Gorn. By the time of the third season for Strange New Worlds, the Enterprise had firmly established itself as one of Starfleet's most important vessels. The ongoing conflict with the Gorn continued to evolve, while Pike and his crew face increasingly complex challenges across the final frontier. I will say that the Gorn conflict did get wrapped up rather quickly, which was a bit of a shame. But more importantly, the crew itself continued growing, relationships deepened, and characters evolved, and the Enterprise increasingly felt like the fully realised predecessor to Kirk's famous command, especially as he kept popping up in the episodes every 5 minutes. Anyway, I'm joking. For many fans, this period does represent the Constitution-class at its absolute peak. It's not yet hardened by years of service, not yet approaching major refits we see down the line, but it's operating at the height of its original capabilities under one of Starfleet's greatest captains. Of course, we do know how this story ends. Eventually, Christopher Pike's future catches up with him. The accident he witnessed on Boreth will occur. His sacrifice will save lives. And we do know that command of the Enterprise will eventually pass to another captain, James T. Kirk. But that's what makes Pike's story so compelling. We already know the destination. What matters is the journey. Because every mission Pike undertakes, every world him and the crew visit, every life they save, it all brings everyone one step closer to the fate that Pike has already accepted. And perhaps that's why Pike resonates so strongly with audiences. Not because he's unaware of the future, but because he chooses to face it anyway. Let's talk behind the scenes. The USS Enterprise is arguably the most famous starship in science fiction history, which does create a unique challenge. How do you redesign something that millions of people already know by heart? When audiences first saw Pike's Enterprise in Star Trek Discovery Season 2, reactions were mixed. For some members of the community, the ship looks too different, too modern and too detailed. After all, this was supposed to be the same Enterprise seen in the original series, a ship first designed in the 1960s. Yet for the production team, simply recreating the original film in miniature wasn't really an option. Television had changed, audience expectations had also changed, and the level of visual detail expected from modern productions was dramatically different. The challenge wasn't simply replacing Matt Jeffries' legendary design, It was updating it while preserving its identity, and honestly, that's exactly what they achieved. Every version of the Enterprise does owe its existence to one man, Matt Jefferies. Back in the 1960s, Jefferies created one of the most influential spacecraft designs ever produced. His Constitution-class, originally Starship-class, USS Enterprise, established many of the visual rules that Star Trek would follow for decades, into series like The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. These being twin warp nacelles, a saucer section, and engineering hull. Those elements became part of Star Trek's core visual DNA. Now, the Strange New Worlds Enterprise doesn't abandon any of those principles. Instead, it embraces them. The silhouette remains instantly recognisable. Even from a distance, even just around the corner, on one glance you know exactly what ship you're looking at, and that's not an accident. It is a deliberate effort to preserve the legacy of the original design, while updating it for a modern audience. Now, as mentioned, the first version of Pike's Enterprise does appear in Discovery Season 2, or rather the end of Season 1. At the time, the production team needed a ship that could bridge two very different eras of Star Trek. It needed to feel connected to the original series, but also it needed to sit comfortably alongside Discovery's much more detailed visual style. The result was a Constitution-class that looked familiar yet new. The whole plating became visible, the windows were expanded, the impulse engines were even enlarged. The ship gained a greater sense of scale than previous television versions. Perhaps most importantly, the vessel finally looked like a starship capable of housing over 400 crew members. This was a common criticism of earlier versions of the Enterprise, this being the scale often felt inconsistent. The Discovery and Strange New Worlds redesign did address that issue directly. I did just want to touch on the sizing of the Enterprise as we see it in modern Star Trek. As mentioned, it has gone through a bit of a retcon, and this was co-designed by John Eaves when it was first introduced in Discovery Season 1, or rather the end of it. This is in the episode Will You Take My Hand? Basically, the retcon design as we see in the modern shows does bring it in line with the Federation aesthetics seen in Enterprise and the motion picture. However, it is still up in the air because the redesign does do away with the classic smooth hull look, and other details such as the phasable turrets and photon torpedo launchers. The aft section is longer, and the ship is ultimately upscaled from the original size by over 50%, in order to comply with Discovery's aesthetics. However, what's really interesting is if you research this more, and I will link the page down below if I don't forget, remind me if I do, the original design of the Enterprise had these long swept-back nacelle pylons. It was something Matt Jefferies had conceived back in the 1964 design era as kind of a fallback options. That wasn't used, but it was adopted in the Constitution-class model, which we do see. Ultimately, the retcon of the design is intended for the 21st century audiences as a modernized version of the original classic within the Prime timeline. It is the same ship though, that's what's really confusing. Even though obviously the original design was used as the USS Defiant in Enterprise Season 4. Yeah, it gets more confusing there. I will link it down below so you can kind of understand what was going on it. It is a bit of a controversial topic. Yeah, hopefully you guys can explore and make what it is for yourself. Again, this also does come down to the sizing of it as well. As I mentioned, the original was somewhere in the realm of 225 meters. This one is around 440 meters. So yeah, welcome to Star Trek where ships sometimes end up bigger than they originally were. Yay! Anyway, back to the video. Now, following the events of Discovery Season 2, the Enterprise underwent both an in-universe refit and an out-of-universe redesign. The ship we do see throughout Strange New Worlds is subtly different from its Discovery appearance. For example, the bridge was refined, the lighting changed, and the ship's interiors became warmer and more inviting. Even the exterior received adjustments to better align with the aesthetic of the original series. This was not a simple visual update, it did reflect the philosophy of Strange New Worlds itself. The series deliberately embraces the optimism and adventure spirit of classic Star Trek. As a result, the Enterprise needed to feel welcoming. Now, of all the sets constructed for Strange New Worlds, none received more attention than the bridge. Okay, maybe Pike's quarters as well, but still. The original series bridge is iconic, if not legendary. Replicating it is never going to be easy. The production team ultimately chose a middle ground. Rather than creating a perfect replica, like we saw in Star Trek Enterprise, they expanded the design. The layout remains familiar. There's a captain's chair at the centre, the helm and navigation at the forward of it, and science communication around the perimeter. Yet everything does feel more practical. It's also more spacious. Ultimately, it's more believable as a functioning command center. The result is one of the most successful Enterprise bridges ever built. A bridge that feels simultaneously modern and classic. I will say, one of the smartest decisions made by Strange New Worlds was giving Pike a home. Not just a captain's quarters, it is essentially a home. Previous Star Trek captains often spent most of their time on the bridge or in briefing rooms, yet Pike is different. His quarters became one of the defining locations of the series. This all revolves around the kitchen, the dining table, and just the regular dinners with the crew. For perhaps the first time, viewers saw a Starfleet captain who actively nurtured his crew through hospitality. The dinners became recurring events, moments where characters could relax, talk, and laugh. Yes, this is a small detail when we're usually talking about phasers and torpedoes, but I do love that the quarters and the kitchen did change the atmosphere of the show. When Star Trek Strange New Worlds premiered, something unexpected happened. Everybody fell in love with the Enterprise all over again. This is because the ship felt alive. Through every corridor, room, deck, it felt inhabited. The Enterprise isn't simply a filming location. Like many ships before it, it became a character, one of personality, warmth, and history. Realistically, the ship does feel lived in. For decades, the original series Enterprise represented Star Trek. But as time passed, newer generations became more familiar with ships like the Galaxy-class Enterprise D, the Intrepid-class Voyager, and the Defiant-class Defiant. Strange New Worlds changed that once again. For many viewers, Pike's Enterprise has become their Constitution-class, and if you've got to this point in the video, I'll ask you this question. Which Enterprise is your Enterprise? April's, which we've barely seen any of, Pike's, which we've seen in Strange New Worlds, or Kirk's, which we've seen in the original series? For me, it has to be Pike's. Anyway, as I was saying, for many viewers, this is their introduction to Star Trek's most legendary vessel. It's a remarkable achievement for the new design. And let's be honest, redesigning the Enterprise was always going to be controversial. Yet somehow, the production team managed to create a version that appealed to both longtime fans and newcomers alike. Very few Star Trek projects have accomplished something so difficult. I will give props to Picard with the internal layout of the USS Titan. Ultimately, Pike's Enterprise succeeds because it understands what the Enterprise has always represented: hope, curiosity, exploration. Under Pike's command, those ideals shine through better than ever. This isn't a starship defined by war, or politics, or conflict. The ship is ultimately dedicated to discovery, to Strange New Worlds. And perhaps that's why so many have embraced it once again. Because in a Star Trek franchise which is built all around optimism, Pike's Enterprise does feel like a return to Star Trek's roots, especially when we had a show like Discovery. Returning to that foundation is what made Strange New Worlds one of the most beloved new series. So yes, the USS Enterprise has worn many faces throughout Star Trek history, from the likes of Robert April to Christopher Pike and then James T. Kirk, and even Captain Spock and Decker in the future. Every captain left their mark upon the ship. The Pike's era occupies a unique place in that legacy. It is a period where the Enterprise stands on the edge of history. The Federation is expanding and new frontiers await, and one of Starfleet's greatest captains is guiding his crew into the unknown. Through Strange New Worlds, we've finally been able to explore those missing years, and what we've discovered is a version of the Enterprise that is every bit as iconic as the one that came after it. A ship filled with hope, adventure, and endless possibility. But what do you think of Pike's Enterprise? Do you prefer this version of a Constitution-class over Kirk's original ship? And where does it rank among your favourite versions of the Enterprise? Let us know down below in the comments. If you've enjoyed this Star Trek Ship Explained video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to Trek Central, and check out our deep dives into ships, technology, and history of the entire Star Trek universe. For now, I've been Captain Jack, thanks for watching, and as always, live long and prosper.